At my wedding, I saw my sister pour something into my champagne when no one was looking. I swapped our glasses. When she raised the toast, I smiled, then it began. But to understand why the sight of my own sister, collapsing into an $8,500 red velvet cake, was the most satisfying moment of my life. You have to understand the architecture of the disaster. You have to understand the 3 months of hell that paved the road to that ballroom. It did not start with a glass of poisoned wine. It started with a knock on my door, and a demand that I should have rejected the moment it left her mouth. I was sitting in my apartment, the one I paid for with my own salary, as a marketing director at a prestigious firm in Charleston. The room was a sanctuary of silence and order. My life was spread out on the dining table, in the form of color-coded spreadsheets and vendor contracts. I liked contracts. Contracts were logical. They had terms, conditions, and clear penalties for breach of agreement. Unlike my family, my life was a series of defensive strategies, a fortress I had meticulously built to keep the chaos of my childhood at bay. I was 29 years old, successful, and about to marry Sterling Ashford. Sterling was an orthopedic surgery resident with hands that could reconstruct shattered bones, and a smile that made my heart skip a beat. But what really sent my sister, Sutton, into a spiral of jealousy was not his character or his career. It was his last name. Sterling came from old Charleston money, the kind of family whose ancestors signed important historical documents and had ships named after them. The Ashfords were the kind of people who still got invited to garden parties at historic estates, and whose social circle was a fortress of its own. I had always prided myself on being self-possessed and logical, traits I developed as a survival mechanism against my parents' whims. My younger sister, Sutton, was 27 and what she called an influencer, which was a fancy word for unemployed and living a virtual life on social media. What she did not advertise to her 12,000 followers was the $51,000 in credit card debt she had been hiding from everyone except me. I was reviewing the floral budget, trying to decide between gardenias and peonies, when Sutton showed up unannounced. She walked in wearing yoga pants that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month, and carrying a designer handbag I knew she could not afford. She did not bother with a hello. "I have been thinking," she announced, dropping her bag onto my clean floor and inspecting her nails. "I should be your maid of honor." I looked up from my spreadsheet, my stomach tightening. "Sutton, I already asked Adeline. You know? My friend from law school." She wrinkled her nose, like she had smelled something rotten. "Pamela, this is a wedding with old money elements. Do you really want someone who wears generic pantsuits, standing next to you in photos that will be in the society pages? Adeline is so serious. Besides, I am your sister. Your only sister. Adeline was my best friend. She had been there for me through bar exams and breakups. But Sutton knew exactly which buttons to press. What will people think if your own flesh and blood is not your maid of honor?" Sutton whined, her voice taking on that pitch that usually preceded a tantrum. "It will look like we are estranged. It will look bad for both of us. Besides, I need this, Pamela. Do you know how good this will be for my brand? A wedding at the historic Charleston Hotel, with the Ashford family. I could gain thousands of followers. I should have said no right then. Should have held my ground and pointed to the door. But then she played her ace card. She called mother. 2 hours later, both our parents showed up at my door. The air in my apartment instantly felt heavy, suffocating. Mother was already dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Father wore his disappointed expression, the one he had perfected over decades of making me feel guilty for existing. "Pamela, sweetheart," Mother said, taking my hands in hers. "Sutton is devastated. Absolutely devastated. She feels like you do not love her. That is not true." I started to argue. "I just wanted Adeline, because she is organized and your sister is going through a difficult time right now." Father interrupted, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he used when the discussion was over before it began. "The least you can do is include her in your special day. Make her feel valued. Just indulge your sister," Mother added, squeezing my hands hard enough to hurt. "Do not make her sad. It is one day, Pamela. Surely you can be generous for one day." The manipulation was textbook. They had been doing this my entire life, making Sutton's feelings my responsibility, her happiness my burden. I looked at them, 3 people who supposedly loved me, yet saw me only as a utility to fix their problems. "Fine," I said. The word tasted like ashes in my mouth. "You can be the maid of honor." Sutton squealed and clapped her hands, her devastation vanishing instantly. Mother beamed. Father nodded approvingly, satisfied that he had once again bullied me into submission. I did not know then that this concession had paved the way for Sutton's most vicious plot. I thought I was just agreeing to buy an ugly dress and let her pose for photos. I had no idea I had just invited a predator into the most vulnerable day of my life. 2 weeks before the ceremony, the air in Charleston became thick with humidity and anticipation. I was standing in a bridal boutique that required appointments months in advance and served champagne in crystal flutes to anyone who walked through the door. It smelled of lavender and old money. This was the sort of place where price tags were tucked discreetly inside the seams, operating on the assumption that if you had to look, you probably were in the wrong zip code. I sat on a velvet-tufted ottoman, clutching my purse like a shield. My phone buzzed in my lap with emails from work, but I ignored them. I was watching the dressing room curtain. Sutton stepped out. I hated that she looked beautiful. That was the cruelest trick of genetics. Inside, she was a chaotic mess of insecurity and selfishness, but on the outside, she was stunning. The dress she had chosen without consulting me was a floor-length champagne silk gown. It was cut on the bias, draping over her frame like liquid gold, with a cowl neckline that was elegant and daring all at once. She spun around in front of the tri-fold mirror, admiring herself. "It is perfect," she sighed, smoothing her hands over her hips. "Absolutely perfect. Do you not think so, Pamela?" "It is beautiful," I admitted, standing up to check the tag hanging from the underarm. I flipped the small card over. My stomach dropped. $1,800. "Sutton," I said, keeping my voice low so the sales associate hovering nearby would not hear. We discussed the budget. I allocated $300 for the bridesmaid dresses. "This is 6 times that amount." Sutton waved her hand dismissively, still staring at her reflection. "Oh, please. $300. What can you even get for that? Polyester." She turned to face me. her eyes widening with that familiar manipulative glint. "You are marrying into the Ashford family, Pamela. We cannot look cheap in the photos. What would Sterling's mother think if your maid of honor looked like she bought her dress at a department store clearance rack? It reflects on you." It was her favorite weapon. The fear that I did not belong. The fear that my family's messiness would stain the pristine reputation of the man I loved. "I can't ask the other bridesmaids to pay this much," I said, trying to maintain a logical front. "They do not have to," she said quickly. "They can wear the cheaper ones. I am the maid of honor. I should stand out. Besides," she paused, and her voice dropped to a whisper, losing its bravado, "I am a little short this month. I need you to cover it." A little short. That was a euphemism for drowning. I knew about the credit card statements she hid from our parents. I knew about the $51,000 in consumer debt she had racked up buying a lifestyle she could not support. I looked at her. She was 27 years old, standing there in a gown that cost more than my first car, expecting me to fix it. Just like I fixed her college applications. Just like I fixed her resume. Just like I smoothed over her tantrums with our parents. If I said no, she would cause a scene. She would cry. She would call our mother, and within an hour, my phone would be ringing with accusations that I was being selfish, that I was punishing her, that I had plenty of money, now so why was I being so stingy? The exhaustion hit me harder than the price tag. It was a bone, deep weariness. "Fine," I said. The word came out flat. Sutton squealed and threw her arms around me, careful not to wrinkle the silk. "You are the best sister ever!" I knew you would understand. This is going to look so good on my feed. I walked to the counter and handed the sales associate my credit card. I did not even look at the receipt when I signed it. Looking back now, standing in the shadow of what was to come, I can see that transaction for what it really was. It was not a gift. It was a bribe. I was paying for peace. I was paying to keep the monster dormant for just 2 more weeks. That evening, I called Adeline. She was the only person I could tell. Adeline was a criminal defense attorney, which meant she had seen humanity at its absolute worst and had very little patience for nonsense. "You are enabling her," Adeline said. Her voice came through the phone tinny and sharp. I was sitting on my kitchen floor, a glass of cheap wine in my hand, staring at the wall. "I know," I said. "But it is easier than fighting them all, Addie. If I said no, my parents would have made the next 2 weeks a living hell. I just want to get to the altar without a war." "Easier is not always better, Pam," she said. "You are teaching her that she can cross your boundaries, and you will pay the toll every single time. What happens when she decides she wants something bigger?" "It is just a dress," I said, trying to convince myself. "It is just one day. Once the wedding is over, I can distance myself. I just need everything to be perfect for the reception." Adeline was silent for a long moment. Then she sighed. "Just be careful. People like Sutton do not stop taking just because you stop giving. They take until there is nothing left." I hung up and looked at the dining room table. It was covered in a large architectural blueprint of the hotel ballroom. I had turned my anxiety into geometry. I sat down and pulled the seating chart toward me. This was my battlefield. I had spent hours analyzing the social dynamics of the reception, trying to engineer a layout that would neutralize my family. I picked up the sticky note labeled Sutton. I placed her at the head table, to my right. That was non-negotiable for a maid of honor. But then I looked at the rest of the arrangement. To my left, Sterling, my shield. Directly across from us, at the VIP table, I placed Adeline. I wanted eyes on her. If Sutton was going to be next to me, I wanted my sharpest, most cynical ally positioned with a direct line of sight. I moved the sticky note labeled Adeline and pressed it down firmly. It felt like setting a sentry. I arranged the other tables with military precision. My parents were seated at table 3, close enough to feel important, but far enough away that I would not have to hear my father's passive, aggressive comments about the cost of the wine. I surrounded them with Sterling's most talkative aunts, women who could suffocate any complaint with a barrage of polite Southern gossip. I checked the angles. I checked the sightlines. I checked the flow of traffic for the waiters. As a marketing director, I understood the power of image. I knew that if you controlled the lighting, the setting, and the perspective, you could make a disaster look like a triumph. I thought I could apply the same principles to my sister. I thought that if I just spent enough money, planned enough details, and curated the environment perfectly, I could force her to behave. I stared at the little pink sticky note with her name on it. It looked so innocent sitting there on the white paper. I had accounted for her vanity. I had accounted for her greed. I had accounted for her need for attention. But as I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, 12 days before the wedding, I made a fatal calculation error. I assumed Sutton played by the same rules of logic that I did. I assumed she wanted to look good more than she wanted to hurt me. I did not know it then, but no amount of seating charts or expensive silk dresses can fix a person who enjoys breaking things. I turned off the light, leaving the blueprint in the dark, and went to bed, believing I had everything under control. I was wrong. The Charleston Historic Hotel ballroom was a vision of Southern elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast warm, honeyed light over round tables dressed in ivory silk, each centerpiece a cascade of white roses and trailing ivy. The hardwood floors gleamed, reflecting the glow of hundreds of candles that flickered in glass votives. It smelled of expensive perfume, roasting meat, and the specific, crisp scent of old money. At the far end of the room, on a table of its own, stood the centerpiece that had cost me more than most people paid for rent in 3 months. The wedding cake. It was 6 tiers of red velvet perfection, each layer wrapped in ivory fondant and decorated with edible gold leaf that caught the light like scattered stars. Handmade sugar flowers, peonies, roses, and gardenias cascaded down one side in a breathtaking display of the baker's artistry. It cost $8,500. And looking at it from across the room, gleaming under the lights, I told myself it was absolutely worth every penny. It was a monument to the life I had built, a life that was polished, sweet, and structurally sound. I sat at the head table, positioned exactly where I had specified in my carefully drawn seating chart. As a marketing director, I understood the power of optics. I understood the importance of angles, the way a photograph can tell a story or destroy a reputation. I had spent hours planning this setup, treating my wedding reception like a high-stakes corporate merger. Sterling sat to my left, devastatingly handsome in his tailored tuxedo. His dark hair perfectly styled, his hand warm over mine on the white tablecloth. To my right sat Sutton, poured into that champagne colored silk gown that had cost me nearly $2,000. Her hair was swept up in an elaborate updo that must have taken hours. Next to Sterling was David, his best friend and head groomsman. A cardiologist with an easy smile, and the kind of steady presence that made him perfect for the role. I had instructed the hotel staff specifically on this arrangement. Husband on the left meant that in almost every captured moment of us as a couple, we would be facing each other. My facial angle would always be flattering. The lighting would catch my features perfectly. I thought I had planned for everything. In front of each of us sat identical crystal champagne flutes, provided by the hotel. They were devoid of engravings or distinguishing marks, sleek and modern. They caught the candlelight, the bubbles rising in perfect golden streams through the expensive vintage champagne Sterling's family had gifted for the toast. The main course had just been cleared away. It had been herb-crusted lamb with roasted vegetables, plated like art. The staff moved efficiently between tables, the soft clink of cutlery on china, creating a sophisticated symphony. Conversation hummed around us, punctuated by bursts of laughter from Sterling's college friends at table 7. For the first time in months, I felt the knot of tension in my chest begin to loosen. The ceremony had been flawless. My father had walked me down the aisle without making a scene. My mother had only cried at the appropriate times. And Sutton had been a model maid of honor. She had held my bouquet. She had smiled for the photographer. She had even helped me with my train before we entered the reception. I looked at her now. She was laughing at something David was saying. Her head thrown back, her neck long and graceful. She looked happy. She looked normal. Maybe I was wrong, I thought, taking a sip of water. Maybe the dress was enough. Maybe giving her the spotlight she craved had actually worked. The strategy of appeasement seemed to be paying off. I had managed the risks, mitigated the threats, and now I was crossing the finish line. I glanced across the dance floor to the VIP table. Adeline was there, just as I had placed her. She was sipping red wine, her eyes scanning the room with the practiced boredom of a woman who spent her days examining felons. When our eyes met, she raised a brow, a silent question. I gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Everything is fine," I mouthed. Adeline did not smile back. She just kept watching. Sterling leaned close to my ear, his breath warm against my skin, breaking my focus. The smell of his cologne, cedar and bergamot, washed over me, a scent that usually meant safety. "Did you see Uncle Richard trying to flirt with your great-aunt Miriam?" he whispered, his voice thick with amusement. "I think he has had too much of the merlot." I smiled, turning completely to my left to look at him. I rotated my entire upper body, turning my back to my sister, eager to share a private moment with my new husband. "Oh, please tell me she shut him down," I laughed, leaning into him. I was happy. In that split second, I was just a bride enjoying her wedding, blind to the fact that I had just exposed my back to the one person in the room who wanted to stab it. I had let my guard down for 5 seconds. And 5 seconds was all Sutton needed. I was laughing at Sterling's joke, my face turned toward him. My shoulder pressed lightly against his arm. It was a genuine laugh, the kind that makes your eyes crinkle at the corners, the kind that momentarily erases the strategic map of the room you have been holding in your head for 6 hours. For a heartbeat, I was not a marketing director. I was not a daughter managing a crisis. I was just a woman in love, sharing a secret with her husband. But my peripheral vision was a curse I could not turn off. Even while my focus was on Sterling, the corner of my eye was recording the data from the right side of the table. I saw the movement. It was smooth, practiced, and terrifyingly casual. Sutton's hand did not shake. It did not hesitate. Her arm extended across the narrow gap between us. The champagne-colored silk of her sleeve rustling softly against the tablecloth. Her fingers were cupped, hiding something small. She reached out as if to adjust my place card, which had shifted slightly during the dinner service. It was a perfectly innocent gesture. Helpful, even. A maid of honor ensuring her sister's table setting remained picture perfect. But as her hand hovered over my crystal flute, it tilted. Just a fraction of an inch. I saw a single drop of colorless liquid fall from her palm. It struck the surface of my champagne and vanished instantly. The carbonation swallowed it whole. The golden bubbles continued to rise in cheerful, unbroken streams, masking the contamination in less than a second. Sutton pulled her hand back. She used her index finger to nudge my place card 2 millimeters to the left, then withdrew completely. I saw her settle back into her chair, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. It was the smile of a cat that had just knocked a vase off a shelf and was waiting for the crash. My heart hammered against my ribs, a sudden, violent rhythm that drowned out the jazz music playing in the background. My breath hitched. Did I just imagine that? The question flashed through my mind, desperate and hopeful. Maybe it was a trick of the candlelight. Maybe it was a shadow cast by the centerpiece. Maybe my exhaustion and paranoia had finally hallucinated a betrayal, where there was none. Sutton was selfish, yes. She was greedy, yes. But to drug me, to poison me at my own wedding in front of 200 witnesses. That was a level of malice I did not want to believe existed in my own bloodline. I turned back to the table, my smile frozen on my face like a mask. I looked at the glass. It sat there, innocent and deadly, the condensation beating on the crystal. It looked exactly like Sterling's glass. It looked exactly like Sutton's glass. Then, my phone buzzed. It was lying face up on the white tablecloth, right next to the charger plate. The vibration hummed against the wood, a sharp, insistent sound that cut through the ambient noise of clinking silverware and laughter. The screen lit up. One notification. One message. I looked down, and the world stopped. It was from Adeline. There were only 5 words, written in all capital letters, but they hit me with the force of a physical blow. Swap glasses. She drugged it. The air left my lungs. The noise of the ballroom receded into a dull roar, like I was underwater. The cheerful clinking of forks, the swell of the saxophone, the laughter of the guests, it all became distant background radiation. The only thing that was real was the glowing screen and the terrifying truth it carried. Adeline had seen it. From her vantage point across the dance floor, with her lawyer's eye for detail and her predator's instinct for crime, she had witnessed the exact same moment I had caught in my periphery. I looked up slowly, carefully. I found Adeline in the crowd. She was holding her wine glass near her lips, but she was not drinking. Her eyes were locked on mine, dark and intense. She gave me the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. It was a confirmation. It was a command. I looked back at the champagne flute. My mind raced, connecting the dots with horrifying speed. This was not a prank. This was a tactical strike. Sutton knew that Sterling's family valued decorum above all else. She knew they watched for cracks in the armor. If I drank that glass, whatever was in it, sedatives, laxatives, something to make me sick or slur my words, I would become a spectacle. I would be the bride who could not handle her alcohol. The bride who stumbled during the toast. The bride who threw up on the head table. Sutton did not just want to ruin my night. She wanted to ruin my reputation. She wanted to prove to the Ashfords, and to my parents, and to herself, that I was not perfect, that I was messy, that I was trash. Rage, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. It washed away the fear. It washed away the shock. It washed away the 29 years of guilt and obligation I had carried for this girl. I looked at my sister. She was checking her reflection in the back of a spoon, oblivious to the fact that she had just signed her own death warrant. She thought I was the same Pamela who paid her debts. The same Pamela who bought the $1,800 dress. The same Pamela who apologized for taking up space. She was wrong. That Pamela died the moment that drop hit the champagne. I sat there, staring at the poison in the crystal flute, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was the calm of a general who realizes the enemy has just walked into a trap. I was not going to make a scene. I was not going to scream or cry or throw the drink in her face. That would only make me look crazy. That would give her the victory. No. I was going to play the game. And I was going to win. I needed to move the glasses. But Sutton was right there, sitting less than 2 feet away, waiting for me to take a sip. If I reached for them now, she would notice. She would say something. I needed a distraction. I needed a miracle. And then, I heard the click of heels on the hardwood floor behind me. Distinctive, authoritative clicks. I knew that walk. Everyone in Charleston knew that walk. It was Mrs. Eleanor Ashford, my mother-in-law, the matriarch. She was approaching the head table from the rear, likely coming to congratulate us before the speeches began. I felt the vibration of her approach through the floorboards. Sutton stiffened beside me. I could practically smell her desperation. Sutton was obsessed with status, and Eleanor Ashford was the highest status person in the room. This was Sutton's chance to network, to charm, to claw her way up the social ladder. I knew exactly what my sister would do. She would turn around. She would launch herself at Eleanor like a missile. She would forget everything else in the room for the chance to be seen by an Ashford. I placed my hands on the table, my fingers resting lightly near the base of my glass. My muscles coiled, ready to strike. I waited for the turn. The sound of expensive heels on hardwood stopped directly behind our chairs. The scent of Chanel No. 5 wafted over the table, cool and imperious. Mrs. Eleanor Ashford had arrived. Beside me, Sutton reacted exactly as I knew she would. It was a Pavlovian response to the proximity of power. She did not just turn her head, she physically reoriented her entire existence. She shifted in her chair, practically vibrating with the need to be noticed, to be validated, to be part of the inner circle.
"Oh,
Mrs. Ashford!" Sutton exclaimed, her voice jumping an octave into a register of manufactured delight. She swiveled her body completely around, turning her back to the table, her back to me, and most importantly, her back to the poison. "I was just telling Pamela how absolutely stunning you look tonight. Is that Oscar de la Renta?"
"The beating is exquisite."
Sutton stood up halfway, leaning over the back of her chair to grasp Mrs. Eleanor's hand, blocking the view of the table with her own silk-clad torso. She was so eager, so desperate to bridge the gap between her credit card debt reality and the Ashford family fortune. This was it. The window of opportunity was open. In my mind, Adeline's text message was screaming, "Swap glasses." My hands moved before I made the conscious decision to move them. It was instinct, bypassing thought. My left hand went to the base of my glass, the one with the death sentence dissolving in the bubbles. My right hand went to the base of Sutton's glass. I did not lift them. Lifting them would catch the light. Lifting them would create movement that might be seen by a guest at table 4, or a waiter clearing plates. Instead, I used the tablecloth. The table was covered in high, thread, Count damask, smooth and starched. It offered just enough slip. I applied gentle, calculated pressure. With my left hand, I slid the poisoned flute to the right. With my right hand, I pulled Sutton's clean flute to the left. They passed each other in the middle. Two ships in the night, gliding silently over the white fabric. The liquid inside barely trembled. The bubbles kept rising, undisturbed. It took 3 seconds. 1. Sutton was gushing about Mrs. Eleanor's charity work. "Oh, I have always admired your dedication to the Children's Hospital. It is so inspiring." 2. The glasses crossed the invisible border between my place setting and hers. I settled the poisoned glass directly in front of Sutton's empty charger plate. I pulled her clean glass in front of mine. 3. I saw a faint smudge of berry-colored lipstick on the rim of the glass I had just stolen from her. Sutton had taken a nervous sip earlier, before the pour was topped off. If she saw that lipstick stain on my glass, she would know. She would know instantly that the glasses had moved. With a flick of my thumb and forefinger, I rotated the stem of the glass in front of me 180 degrees. The lipstick stain spun away, facing me, hidden from her view. To anyone looking from her angle, the rim was pristine. I pulled my hands back into my lap and clasped them together. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hands were steady. It was done. Behind me, the conversation was winding down. Mrs. Eleanor, who had the patience of a saint, but the time management skills of a CEO, was extracting herself from my sister's clutches. "Thank you, dear Mrs. Eleanor said, her voice cool and polite. "You are very kind. I believe the speeches are about to begin, so I should return to my seat." Mrs. Eleanor drifted away, leaving a trail of stunned silence in her wake. Sutton watched her go for a moment, basking in the afterglow of the interaction, convinced she had just made a best friend. She smoothed her hair, took a deep breath, and sat back down. She turned to face the table. I held my breath. This was the moment of truth. If she noticed the placement was off by a millimeter, if she sensed the disturbance in the air, the game was over. Sutton looked at the table. Her eyes swept over the silverware, the centerpiece, and finally, the champagne flutes. She looked at the glass sitting in front of her. The glass I had just filled with her own treachery. She smiled. It was a smug, self-satisfied smile. She reached out and adjusted the stem, moving it just a fraction of an inch closer to her hand. She had no idea. She was so blinded by her own arrogance, so certain of her victory, that she did not even consider the possibility that her prey might bite back. She thought she was the predator. She thought I was the mouse. She had forgotten that mice learn to navigate mazes better than anyone else. I exhaled, the air leaving my lungs in a slow, controlled stream. I looked across the dance floor toward the VIP table. Adeline was there. She was holding her wine glass, her dark eyes fixed on me. She had seen the distraction. She had seen the slide. She had seen the rotation. She raised her glass in the air, a tiny, subtle motion. A toast. The message was clear. We are ready. The room lights dimmed slightly, signaling the start of the program. The MC's voice boomed over the speakers, smooth and professional. Ladies and gentlemen, if we could please have your attention for a special toast. Sutton sat up straighter, preening. She reached for the glass. Her fingers curled around the stem of the poisoned champagne. Let us toast to the happy couple, she whispered to me, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I reached for my glass, her glass, and lifted it. The berry lipstick stain was facing me, a secret badge of my theft. To us, I whispered back. The trap was set. The bait was taken. All I had to do now was wait for the steel jaws to snap shut. The crystal flutes met over the center of the table, with a sound that was pure and terrifyingly final. It was a delicate chime, a single note that rang out like a bell tolling for an execution. To us, Sutton echoed, her eyes locked on mine. Her gaze was heavy with malice, a silent promise that my humiliation was imminent. She believed she was looking at a victim. She believed she was looking at a sister who was moments away from losing her composure, her dignity, and her standing with the Ashford family. She smiled, lifting the glass to her lips, and I watched, mesmerized, as the bottom of the flute tilted toward the ceiling. I raised my own glass, the one that now contained clean, safe vintage champagne, and mirrored her movement. The rim of the glass was cool against my mouth. I took a small, polite sip, letting the dry, crisp liquid wash over my tongue. It tasted like apples and brioche. It tasted like justice. Across the table, Sutton drank deeply. She swallowed a mouthful of her own poison, then another. I watched the muscles in her throat work as she consumed the trap she had set for me. There was no hesitation, no flicker of suspicion. Why would there be? She had watched me the entire time, except for those few seconds when her vanity had compelled her to turn around for Mrs. Eleanor. In her mind, the plan was flawless. She set the glass down on the tablecloth with a satisfied exhale. That is delicious, she said, licking her lips. A faint smudge of berry lipstick remained on the rim, marking the spot where she had sealed her fate. I set my glass down too, making sure my hand trembled just slightly. It was time for the second act of my performance. I had to make her believe it was working. I had to feed her confirmation bias until she was so full of it she choked. I reached up and touched my temple, letting my eyes lose focus for a second. I blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear my vision. Wow, I murmured. Loud enough for her to hear, but quiet enough to keep it between us. That champagne goes straight to your head, does it not? Sutton's eyes lit up. It was immediate, predatory excitement. She leaned in closer, her shoulder brushing mine, invading my space with the intimacy of a conspirator. "You should drink some water, Pam," she whispered, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You know how you get when you mix stress and alcohol. We do not want you getting sloppy in front of Sterling's grandmother." I forced a weak smile. "You are right. I just feel a little dizzy." "Good," I thought. "Keep watching me. Keep focusing on my fake symptoms, so you do not notice your real ones." The lights in the ballroom dimmed further, and a spotlight swept across the room, landing on the small stage set up near the dance floor. The MC's voice boomed out, warm and welcoming. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the best man, Dr. David Aris, for a few words." Applause rippled through the room. Beside Sterling, David stood up, buttoning his tuxedo jacket. He gave Sterling a friendly clap on the shoulder and made his way to the microphone. I used the distraction to lean back in my chair, slumping just a fraction of an inch, rounding my shoulders to mimic the posture of someone whose core muscles were beginning to relax against their will. I saw Sutton clock the movement. She nudged my arm with her elbow, a sharp, covert jab. "Sit up," she hissed, though the delight in her eyes betrayed her. "You are slouching." I straightened up with exaggerated effort, swaying slightly as if my equilibrium was off. "Sorry," I mumbled. "Just tired." David began his speech. He was charming, funny, and articulate, telling stories about their days in residency, about sleepless nights at the hospital, about Sterling's obsession with perfect coffee. The room laughed. Sterling laughed, his hand squeezing mine under the table. But I was not listening to David. My entire world had narrowed down to the woman sitting to my right. I was watching biology take its course. It started about 5 minutes after the toast. The first sign was subtle. Sutton reached up to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, but her hand missed on the first try. Her fingers brushed her cheekbone instead, fumbling for a second before finding the hair. She frowned, a tiny crease appearing between her eyebrows, as if she were annoyed by her own clumsiness. She shook her head slightly, a quick, sharp movement, like a dog shaking off water. Then came the blinking. The human body fights sedation. It is a primal instinct to stay awake, to stay in control. Sutton's blink rate increased, her eyelids fluttering as if the air in the room had suddenly become too dry. She picked up her water glass. Her movements just a beat too slow, a little too deliberate. She took a sip, but when she set the glass back down, the base hit the table with an audible clack that drew a glance from Mrs. Eleanor nearby. Sutton froze. She looked at the glass, then at her hand, as if betraying her. She flexed her fingers, staring at them with a look of mild confusion. The drugs were hitting her bloodstream. Melatonin, or whatever cocktail she had mixed into that vial, was flooding her system. It was crossing the blood-brain barrier, dimming the lights in the control room of her mind. She turned to look at me, perhaps to check if I was seeing this, but I was ready. I had my elbow on the table, my chin resting in my hand, my eyes half closed. I gave her a sleepy, lopsided grin. "Good speech," I slurred softly. Sutton stared at me. Her pupils were dilated, swallowing the blue of her irises. For a second, I saw fear flash across her face. Not fear of me, but fear of the unknown sensation creeping up her spine. The heaviness, the fog. But then she looked at my slumped posture, at my droopy eyes. And the fear vanished, replaced by triumph. She thought we were both drunk. She thought the stress and the champagne were hitting us both. But that she, the golden child, the stronger sister, was handling it better. She is going to crash, Sutton thought. I could practically hear it. She is going to crash, and I am going to be the hero who catches her. David finished his speech, to a round of enthusiastic applause. He raised his glass to us, and the room followed suit. Sterling stood up to hug him, as he returned to the table. The MC returned to the microphone. Thank you, David. And now, we would love to hear from the maid of honor, Sutton. This was it. The point of no return. Sutton pushed her chair back. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor, a harsh sound in the quiet room. She stood up. Or rather, she tried to stand up. She rose to her feet, but her knees did not lock immediately. She swayed, a distinct, circular motion like a tree in a sudden gust of wind. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. Her knuckles turned white. Sterling looked up, concern flickering in his eyes. Sutton, you okay? Sutton blinked at him, her smile wide and slightly unhinged. Never better, Sterling. Just heels. You know? Her words were crisp, but the cadence was off. There was too much space between the syllables. She stepped away from the table. She was wearing 4-inch stilettos, hazardous even under the best conditions. But now they were treacherous. She took a step, and her ankle wobbled. She corrected it with a jerk of her body. I held my breath. Do not fall yet, I prayed. Not here. Not at the table. Get to the stage. Make it public. She began the long walk to the microphone. It was only 20 feet. But it looked like she was crossing a tightrope over a canyon. She moved with a strange, wooden stiffness, forcing each leg to lift and plant. Her arms were held out slightly from her sides for balance. To the casual observer, she might have looked nervous. Or perhaps a little tipsy. But I knew better. I was watching a neurological shutdown in real time. She reached the stage area. She bypassed the center microphone stand and headed straight for the cordless mic resting on the small table next to the cake. Of course. The cake. She wanted the photo op. She wanted to stand next to the $8,500 tower of red velvet and sugar flowers. She wanted the gold leaf to frame her face. She wanted to be the center of the aesthetic universe. She picked up the microphone. Her grip was tight, desperate. She turned to face the room. 300 faces looked back at her. My parents, Sterling's family, my colleagues, the wealthiest people in Charleston. She smiled. It was a beautiful, terrifying smile. Her eyes were glassy, reflecting the chandelier light like mirrors. Hello, everyone, she said. Her voice boomed through the speakers, amplified and clear. But then she paused. It was a long, uncomfortable pause. She seemed to be searching for the next word, hunting for it in a brain that was rapidly filling with cotton. I am Sutton. She swayed again. This time, she took a step back to brace herself, and her heel came dangerously close to the edge of the low stage. I am the sister. The better sister. A ripple of confused laughter moved through the room. People thought it was a joke. A bit of sibling rivalry humor. I squeezed Sterling's hand. He was tense beside me. What is she doing? He whispered. Shh, I said, watching her. Just listen. Sutton giggled. It was a wet, heavy sound. Pamela thinks she is perfect. she told the room, leaning heavily on the podium that wasn't there, swaying in empty space. She thinks she has it all. The job. The money. The doctor. Her voice was changing. The carefully curated influencer accent was slipping away, replaced by the slur of heavy sedation. The filter that kept her jealousy hidden, the social mask she wore to charm the world, was dissolving. The drugs were stripping her down to her ugly, honest core. She looked at me. For a moment, her eyes cleared, and she looked straight at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "But she is not perfect," Sutton announced, her words blurring together. She is just lucky. And luck runs out." She raised her free hand, the one holding her wine glass. She had brought it with her. I had not even noticed. "Cheers," she said, lifting the glass high. The liquid inside sloshed dangerously, spilling over the rim and running down her wrist. She did not seem to feel it. "Cheers to." She blinked. Her eyes rolled back slightly, showing the whites. Her knees buckled, then straightened, then buckled again. The microphone in her hand dipped, creating a screech of feedback that made everyone wince. "Why is the room moving?" she asked the microphone. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. No one laughed. No one breathed. We were all watching a car crash in slow motion. Sutton took a step back, seeking stability, seeking something solid to lean on. But there was nothing behind her except the cake. The beautiful, expensive, towering cake. She turned around, confused, as if she sensed a presence behind her. She looked up at the tiers of red velvet, looming over her like a skyscraper. "Pretty," she mumbled. And then, gravity won. The laws of physics are unforgiving. When a 120-pound woman in 4-inch heels loses her center of gravity, there is no bargaining with the floor. Sutton pitched backward. Her arms flailed, grasping at empty air, seeking purchase where there was none. For a split second, she looked like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Then, she collided with the table. The sound was not a thud. It was a wet, heavy crunch. Followed immediately by the shattering of the internal dowels that held the 6 tiers of the cake together. The $8,500 masterpiece did not just topple. It exploded. Sutton fell directly into the center of the structure. Her back struck the 3rd tier, driving the dense red velvet layers down into the 2nd and 1st. The impact sent a shockwave through the dessert. The top 3 tiers, destabilized and untethered, collapsed inward, burying her. Buttercream frosting, ivory and smooth as silk, sprayed outward like shrapnel. Chunks of deep crimson cake flew through the air, landing on the polished dance floor, on the pristine tablecloths, on the shoes of the guests in the front row. Sutton hit the floor amidst the wreckage, taking the tablecloth and the microphone stand with her. She landed hard on her back, surrounded by a debris field of sugar flowers and gold leaf. For 3 seconds, there was absolute silence. It was a tableau of destruction. My sister lay motionless, her limbs sprawled at unnatural angles. The champagne-colored silk dress, the one she had forced me to pay for, was no longer champagne. It was streaked with violent smears of red. The cake, smashed against her skin and clothes, looked horrifyingly like visceral matter. From the back of the room, to anyone who did not know it was red velvet, it looked like a crime scene. It looked like she had been broken open. Then, my mother screamed. It was a piercing, hysterical sound that shattered the trance. "Sutton!" But Sterling was faster. The man sitting next to me vanished. One moment he was my husband, holding my hand, the next he was a streak of black tuxedo, moving with terrifying speed. He did not run around the head table. He vaulted over it. He planted one hand on the white linen and launched himself across the gap, landing in a crouch on the dance floor. He was at her side before the first echo of the crash had faded. "Cut the music!" he roared. His voice was not the polite, social voice he had used all evening. It was his trauma bay voice. It was a command that brooked no argument. The jazz quartet fell silent instantly. The room was dead quiet, save for the frantic clicking of my mother's heels as she ran toward the stage. I stood up, my legs trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer adrenaline dump of seeing the plan execute with such catastrophic perfection. I walked to the edge of the stage, watching. Sterling was on his knees in the frosting. He did not care about his tuxedo. He did not care about the sticky red crumbs coating his trousers. He grabbed Sutton's shoulder and firmly rolled her onto her side. "Clear the airway," I heard him mutter to himself. He used his fingers to sweep the thick buttercream from her nose and mouth. Sutton was limp, her head lolling back, her eyes closed. She looked small in the wreckage, pathetic. My mother reached the stage, breathless and weeping. "My baby! Oh my God, look at the blood! She is bleeding!" "It is not blood, Blythe," Sterling snapped without looking up. "It is cake. Step back." He pressed 2 fingers against the side of Sutton's neck, checking her pulse. Then he grabbed her wrist. He peeled back one of her eyelids, shining the flashlight from his phone into her pupil. "David, I need you!" Sterling called out. David was already there, kneeling on the other side of Sutton. He had shed his jacket and was loosening the bodice of Sutton's dress to ensure she could breathe. "Pulse is slow," Sterling said, his voice clipped and clinical. "Bradycardic. Pupils are sluggish. Respiration is depressed." Is she having a stroke?" my father asked, looming over them, his face pale. Sterling ignored him. He slapped Sutton's cheek, sharp and hard. "Sutton, can you hear me?" Sutton moaned. It was a low, guttural sound. Her eyelids fluttered, but they did not open. Her body jerked, a reflex against the stimulation. The wireless microphone was still in her hand. She had gripped it tight as she fell, a death grip on the source of her attention. Now, it was lying against her chin, half buried in frosting. But the green light was still on. The connection was still live. "Sutton!" Sterling shouted again. "Wake up!" Sutton shifted. Her eyes cracked open, unfocused and swimming. She looked up at Sterling, but I could tell she did not recognize him. She was seeing shapes. Shadows. The microphone dragged against her lips as she tried to move her head. The speakers crackled. Wrong. Her voice was distorted, amplified through the silent ballroom. It sounded like a ghost speaking from the bottom of a well. "What did she say?" My mother sobbed. Sterling leaned in. "Sutton, what did you take? Did you take anything?" Sutton's eyes rolled, trying to find a focal point. She let out a heavy, wet sigh that blasted through the sound system. "Wrong glass." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Wrong glass. Every person in the room heard it. The waiters frozen by the kitchen doors heard it. The Ashfords at table 1 heard it. Adeline, standing by the pillar with her phone raised, heard it. Sutton tried to lick her lips, tasting the sugar and the regret. The drugged glass. It was a question, slurred and confused, but the confession was absolute. Sterling froze. His hands stopped moving over her patient assessment. He went very still. He looked down at the woman lying in the ruin of our wedding cake, and then he looked up. His eyes met mine. In that look, there was a dawn of understanding. He looked at the chaos. He looked at the symptoms. He looked at the confession. And then he looked at his parents, his mother staring in open-mouthed horror, his father grim-faced. Sterling stood up. He towered over my parents, who were kneeling in the mess, trying to wipe the frosting off their precious daughter. "She did not trip," Sterling said. His voice was cold, ice cold. He looked at my father. "This is a sedative overdose." My father sputtered. "That is ridiculous. She is just tired. She has been working so hard on this wedding." She had a glass of wine on an empty stomach. Sterling shook his head. "No. I am a doctor. I know what a drunk person looks like, and I know what a sedated person looks like. This is synergistic toxicity. She ingested a central nervous system depressant, likely a high dose of melatonin, or benzodiazepines, mixed with alcohol." He pointed at the microphone, which was still clutched in Sutton's hand. "And she just told us exactly how it happened. She drugged the glass. She just drank the wrong one." My mother stood up, her face streaked with tears and red velvet crumbs. "How dare you?" she shrieked. "How dare you accuse her of such a thing? She is your sister-in-law. She loves Pamela." Sterling laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh that had no humor in it. "She tried to drug my wife," Sterling said, his voice rising, carrying to the back of the room. "She attempted to chemically intoxicate Pamela at her own wedding reception, probably to humiliate her, to make her look unfit." He took a step toward my parents, and for the first time in my life, I saw my father shrink back. Sterling was not just a son-in-law anymore. He was an Ashford. He was a man with power, with status, and with the righteous fury of a husband whose wife had been targeted. "I am calling an ambulance," Sterling announced. He pulled out his phone. "Not because I am worried she will die, but because I want a toxicology screen on record." "No," my father shouted. "No ambulance. We will take her home. She just needs to sleep it off." "We do not need a scene. You do not get to decide that," Sterling said, dialing 3 numbers. "You lost the right to decide anything when you raised a daughter who thinks poisoning her sister is a party trick." He put the phone to his ear. "Yes, I have a female, 27, suspected overdose on unknown sedatives. Respiration is depressed. Conscious but delirious." He looked at my parents while he spoke to the dispatcher. "You will go with her to the hospital," he told them, covering the mouthpiece. "You will take her out of here. And if I see any of you, near Pamela again, I will file a police report for attempted poisoning." My mother gasped. "You wouldn't." "Try me," Sterling said. The ambulance arrived in 6 minutes. The paramedics swept into the ballroom, efficient and professional. They loaded Sutton onto a gurney. She was weeping now, a soft, confused sobbing, still covered in red cake, looking like a tragic, broken doll. My parents scrambled after the gurney, desperate to escape the hundreds of eyes staring at them. My father tried to maintain some dignity, straightening his tie, but there is no dignity when you are fleeing the scene of your child's crime. He paused at the door, looking back at me. I stood on the stage, untouched, my white dress pristine, my hand in Sterling's. My father opened his mouth, perhaps to demand I come with them, perhaps to guilt me one last time. But Sterling stepped in front of me. He blocked my father's view completely. "Go," Sterling commanded. My father turned and walked out into the humid Charleston night. The doors swung shut behind them, sealing the toxicity outside. The room was silent. The air conditioner hummed. The smell of sugar and destruction hung heavy in the air. The cake was a ruin, a pile of red rubble on the dance floor. I looked at it. I looked at the $8,500 of wasted ingredients. I looked at the smear of frosting where my sister had fallen, and I felt a bubble of laughter rising in my chest. It wasn't hysteria. It wasn't shock. It was joy. Pure, unadulterated, lightweight joy. The monster was gone. The weight I had been carrying for 29 years, the obligation, the guilt, the fear. It had all been carted away on a stretcher. Adeline walked up to the stage. She held her phone out. "I got it," she said, her voice clear in the quiet room. "I recorded the whole thing. The fall. The speech. The confession. It is all here." She tapped the screen. Sutton's voice, tinny but unmistakable, played back. "The drugged glass." Adeline looked at me and grinned. "Exhibit A, Your Honor." Sterling turned to me. He took my face in his hands. His eyes were searching mine, looking for cracks, looking for the trauma he expected to find. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I am so sorry, Pamela. I am so sorry they ruined it." I looked at him. I looked at the ruined cake. I looked at the stunned guests. And then I looked at the empty doorway, where my family had exited my life. "Ruined it?" I asked. I reached out and dipped my finger into a glob of pristine white frosting that had landed on the edge of the table, miraculously untouched by the red carnage. I tasted it. It was sweet. It was perfect. "Sterling," I said, smiling the first real, unburdened smile of my life. "They didn't ruin anything. They just took out the trash." The hotel manager materialized at my elbow, wringing his hands. He looked from the pile of red rubble on the dance floor to the exit where the ambulance had just departed. "Mrs. Ashford, I am so terribly sorry about this incident," he stammered, his face pale. "Given the circumstances, and the departure of your parents, should we end the reception early?" I looked at the ruined cake. Red velvet crumbs were scattered across the stage, like evidence of a violent crime. White frosting was smeared across the hardwood. The beautiful six-tier masterpiece, which had cost $8,500, was reduced to a sticky, chaotic mound. I looked at the empty doorway. The toxicity that had choked me for 29 years was gone. I turned to the manager and smiled. It was not the practiced, polite smile I had worn for the cameras all day. It was a real smile. "Clean it up," I said firmly. "Bring out whatever sheet cakes you have in the kitchen. Open more champagne. The night has only just begun." The manager blinked. "You want to continue?" "This is my wedding reception," I said. "And I am going to celebrate with the people who actually care about me." Something shifted in the room after that. The guests who had come out of obligation, the society matrons, who had attended solely to judge the centerpieces, made their quiet exits. They did not want to be associated with a scandal. But the people who remained were ours. Sterling's medical school colleagues loosened their ties. Adeline kicked off her heels. Even Mrs. Eleanor Ashford walked up to the bar and ordered a gin and tonic. She looked at me over the rim of her glass, her eyes twinkling with dry amusement. "Well," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "That was certainly the most memorable wedding I have ever attended. You have a spine, Pamela." "I like that." We danced until 2 in the morning. I danced with Sterling under the chandeliers, his arms around my waist, and felt the tension I had been carrying for years finally release. There was no one left to manage, no one left to please. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the hotel suite windows. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "How could you let this happen?" Sutton only did it because she felt left out. She made a mistake. You need to forgive her. Family is family. I read it twice. The old Pamela would have replied. She would have apologized. She would have found a way to make it her fault. But that Pamela had died somewhere between the glass swap and the cake destruction. I deleted the message without responding. Then I blocked the number. I blocked my father next. Then Sutton. One by one. I cut the threads that had bound me to their dysfunction. Freedom tasted like the salt in the Charleston morning air. 1 year later, Sterling drove me home from a prenatal checkup. I was 8 months along, my belly round and firm under my sundress. The ultrasound technician had told us the baby was perfect, a girl. We sat on our back porch as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. My phone, with its new number and clean contact list, sat silent on the table. My mother had tried to reach out through mutual acquaintances, begging to be part of her grandchild's life. I had not responded. Some bridges, once burned, should remain ashes. Sterling handed me a glass of iced tea. He sat down beside me, his hand resting on my stomach. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "The cake, the money." I looked out at the oak trees. I thought about the $8,500. It was a staggering amount of money to lose in 3 seconds. "No," I said. "I do not regret a penny. That cake was not a dessert, Sterling. It was a ransom payment. I paid $8,500 to expose the truth. I paid it to show you, your family, and the world exactly who my sister was. And I paid it to buy my freedom." I took a sip of tea, feeling the cool condensation on the glass. It was the best money I ever spent. My daughter kicked, a strong, assertive flutter against my ribs. I covered the spot with my hand, feeling the miracle of a new life that would never know what it felt like to be a prop in someone else's play. "No golden child," I whispered to the evening air. Sterling covered my hand with his own, his grip warm and steady. "Every child equal," he agreed. "Always." The monster was gone. The cage was open. And for the first time in my life, I was finally, completely free.